think one of the great things about blood work is a way to kind of get this health baseline, but also to uncover things that you might not necessarily know are going on, or they're at the beginning stage of going on, so there's no symptoms yet. If you get to know what your levels, your biomarkers look like year after year, you can see things starting to become an issue because you know what your normals look like. You know what things are normal for you.
Are there certain things that you see that entrepreneurs are especially bad at?
I would say, without a doubt, the number one thing that I see being an issue is sleep, and lack of sleep will show up in your blood work in a million ways.
What are your thoughts on supplements?
Supplements are one of my main tools that I use to help people to improve their current level of health.
What about full body scans? Love to hear your thoughts.
Basically, it's an advanced MRI screening. It's getting rid of a lot of the noise and hopefully a lot of the false positive diagnoses. I don't think any of these tools are perfect yet. They're definitely getting better very rapidly. And with AI, they're going to be just on fire eventually.
Hey, it's Andrew here, and welcome to the E-commerce Fuel Podcast, the show dedicated to helping 7- and 8-figure brand owners build incredible businesses and amazing lives and amazing bodies and minds. And that's what we're going to be focused on in this episode, because joining me today is Dr. Alexis Shields. She is a naturopathic doctor focused on individualized health coaching that I met and was referred to, and had her do some work with me. So we're going to go through an episode here and talk about advanced blood work. We're going to talk about how to keep your mind and your body strong, especially as an entrepreneur. We're talking about supplements. We're going to talk about kind of some of the surprising things that came up in the blood work that I had done that were very counterintuitive, but that biomarkers in my body kind of said we're good to do. It's a whole bunch of stuff. This has been a fascinating experience. I've always been really interested in kind of individualized medicine and blood work beyond what you would get at your kind of just family physician. Or at least that what your family physician does in the United States. And so it's a topic I think is interesting and hope you enjoy it. And Dr. Alexis, thank you for being here. This is going to be fun.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I originally got referred to you through Matt Diggity, and he's a man who looks about 10 years younger than he actually is. And so when he's like, hey, I'm working with this doctor and she's been phenomenal for kind of preventative care and biomarker tracing and stuff, my ears perked up. I was like, oh man, I can knock 10 years off the profile shot here.
That's the goal.
Yeah. But talk a little bit, if you would, beyond my intro, can you give people a sense of what you specialize in the work you do? And I don't know if you're focused just on entrepreneurs, but I know you work with a ton of them.
Mm-hmm. I do work with a lot of entrepreneurs. So I'm a naturopathic doctor, like you said, which is a little bit of a confusing term because there are naturopathic doctors worldwide, many different countries, and the training is very different from country to country, but the name is the same. And so I was trained in the US. We're trained basically as primary care physicians in general. So we go to 4-year medical schools after pre-med training, and we're trained to be able to be like a GP. So when I first graduated, I went to I basically worked as a primary care physician in a brick and mortar practice. And then I've moved since then to online. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and my specialty is really looking at blood biomarkers. I'm a data nerd, and so I love following numbers and watching those numbers change based on different diet and lifestyle changes that I make. And so I've kind of developed a tool that I used for myself in the beginning, and now I work with others and help them to track their own data and also just make sense of their data. So oftentimes when I'm starting to work with someone, I'm just using very basic blood work that is something that you would get with any GP. Sometimes it's a little bit more involved, what I would recommend, but in general, it's just very basic blood tests. It's nothing special or anything like that. And you can get really incredible information and in-depth information from that information if you know how to look at it. So I'm helping people go through their information and create a health story and figure out what they want to achieve or what they want to monitor long run, as well as the things that I see that are going on. And then we put together a long-term plan as well as a kind of a tracking schedule.
So before we dive into all of the nitty gritty on how the blood tests work, the markers, all the, myriad things wrong with me, Can you give an example of like how powerful this is from a use case perspective? Maybe someone who was having some issues, having problems, came in, you did the blood test, you were able to isolate what the issues were and really target them to where they had a dramatically improved quality of life.
Sure. So I think one of the great things about blood work is not all people have this idea that if there's a disease process going on, or if there's something going on, you'll always know because you get symptoms. And that's not always true. There are a lot of health issues that are very silent, especially they can begin silent and become, louder with symptoms later. But there are some things that really don't put out that much alarm bells symptomatically, or you just don't listen to those alarm bells, or you may not know to listen to them. So I've had many, many examples of people who, for example, high blood sugar, your blood sugar levels, when they're elevated, you might not always recognize what that feels like, especially if you've had it going on for a really long period of time, or it's something that's been slowly building over time. That, I catch a lot of people that are very near type 2 diabetes, or they're type 2 diabetic and they don't know. So that is something that is, I think, very eye-opening for people, that, you're not always going to feel bad if something is not working underneath. And so the blood work is a way to kind of get this health baseline, but also to uncover things that you might not necessarily know are going on, or they're at the beginning stage of going on, so there's no symptoms yet. I've also, because I do I do a pretty extensive list of tests in the beginning. I do all the basics and then a few additional things. I've caught people who have had pituitary tumors and thyroid tumors and things that they had no idea that they had, because they weren't producing any symptoms yet, because they were at the very beginning stage. And it was certain results that when we saw them, we couldn't make sense of what was going on. And so a specialist was involved. And once they did further scans and things, they saw that there were some tumors. So there are also, blood work is tricky for a lot of people. Ask me, if I get this blood test, can I rule out that I have cancer? And cancer, is this blanket term that we give to so many different things, because there are so many different types of cancer. And so it is true that certain blood values, basic blood values, will increase with certain types of cancers, but it's not really a way of screening you for all cancers, for example. But I've caught cancers in a very early stage before I've even had some of their doctors come back and say, how did you know this was going on from a basic blood test? Because, it's not something, people aren't proactively doing their blood work this extensively. Usually you wait until there's a problem and then you get the blood work. And so there's already the problem going on before you get the blood work to show the problem. So when you're doing it preventatively like this, and you get to know what are all my biomarkers when I'm feeling good, when I'm feeling healthy, or at least I think that I am, that can be really telling, because, either we catch something that is going on that shouldn't be, or if you get to know what your biomarkers look like year after year, you can see things starting to become an issue, because you know what your normals look like, what things are normal for you. And so you're not waiting for there to be a problem that you're not really sure, like, what is my normal? What do I typically look like? And is this a red flag for me, or, that kind of thing. So lots of, we've caught lots of things that people were surprised because they didn't have necessarily the symptoms to support it.
So we kicked things off, this whole process, blood testing, like I alluded to at the top. So went in, got a bunch of blood taken out, and they sent it off. And the blood testing, I think, if you think about doing this, I think I paid the labs, I don't know, 400, 500-ish ballpark dollars for all the tests. And it was a ton, 20 plus different tests. And then we get together and sit down, and you have this whole spreadsheet. And for someone who comes from a financial and like Excel background, I just completely nerded out. It was fun to go in and see all these biomarkers in this spreadsheet and formulas cross-referenced, and you've built this whole thing. That was fun. What are the biomarkers? And obviously we could you've got dozens of them that you track, but maybe what are some of the key biomarkers that you are looking for, and the things that in this extensive battery of tests, and maybe even, is there a name for this test? Like besides like a lipid panel, it's just like a basic test that runs that checks your cholesterol and heart conditions. What are the different types of tests and key markers you're looking for in a test like this?
So for someone who I'm ordering blood work for them, I use a lab called Ulta. That is a wholesale lab that kind of gets really deep discounts when you're paying out of pocket for some of these tests. And so the basic tests run you around $370. And then if you add on hormones, it's closer to $400. So this is many, many biomarkers and, a few additional things than what you would get maybe if you went into your doctor and had some basic testing. So the main areas that I'm looking for are, I want to do a full assessment of blood sugar and how your body responds to sugar. This is one of from a longevity standpoint, looking at your fasting glucose or fasting blood sugar level is one of the most important kind of key markers when it comes to predicting health span and lifespan and future development of diabetes. So I'm looking at glucose and fasting insulin levels and your triglycerides and hemoglobin A1C and a bunch of different markers that give us a really complete picture of how your body handles blood sugar. That to me is one of the most important sections, because that really is a huge predictor of developing future chronic disease. And then there's the cardiovascular workup, which my workup is a little bit more extensive. So traditionally you would just go and get a lipid panel, like you were saying. I also add on a couple other markers. One that is, if you're a Peter Attia follower, you'll already be very familiar with, probably because this is like one of his favorite things to talk about right now, is apolipoprotein B, or they call it ApoB for short. And it's a really good marker or predictive marker of risk. And that's cardiovascular disease, heart attack, strokes, that kind of thing. Cholesterol, so total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, cholesterol those are calculated numbers. So when you get the test back, those are coming from calculations. And so anything that is actually truly measured is more of a predictive marker of risk. And apolipoprotein B is a measured number. It's not calculated. So I even put a little bit more weight on that marker than I do actual cholesterol. But you have to create a whole picture. And so I'm using all of the tools, even though all of them, individually are not as strong, but together they make a stronger picture. So ApoB, I also will add on lipoprotein A. Lipoprotein A is, it's a little a, is a kind of genetically influenced marker. So I like to do that once. Usually you just do it one time, because it doesn't typically change that much when you make changes to diet and lifestyle. And it gives us it can be one of the markers anyway that tells us about genetic risk, because that's also a factor when we're looking at cardiovascular risk. And then I'm looking at risk ratios and triglyceride levels. So cholesterol and cardiovascular risk, obviously that's one of the biggest killers that we have as you get older. It's a huge risk. And so that's a big one. As well as looking at inflammation. So looking at different inflammatory markers, that really increases risk for chronic disease and heart disease and diabetes and dementia. So it's that inflammation is also a really key component. And then, should I just go through the rest of the main sections that I do, or do you want those?
These are good. I think there's the high level ones and they're good. And actually on the inflammation front, you always, not always, I feel like I've been hearing more about people saying inflammation, this causes inflammation, glutens, all these kind of issues. And it sounds, I'm always skeptical. It just sounds like, is this really that big of a deal? I mean, what causes inflation?
Yeah,
100%. It sounds like something that the local food co-op is trying to use to sell you more, some kind of bread that
helps with inflammation.
It sounds very unbelievable. Very skeptical. I'm skeptical. But what is it? It sounds like it actually is something that is important. What causes it, and why is it such a big? Why can it lead to chronic disease over time?
So inflammation it's not a bad thing necessarily in itself. Inflammation is just the immune system activation in any way. So if you cut your finger, inflammation is essentially what is helping your finger to heal. It's the activation of your immune system that allows your immune system to then do what it needs to do to heal your body. And so inflammation can be from cutting yourself, from getting in an accident, from there can be inflammation within a organ. For example, if you have liver disease, you can have inflammation within that organ. And so with inflammation, it's a crucial part of your immune system and a crucial part of healing. But you want it to be within a realm of normal, because once it starts getting to a level that's too high, then that inflammation can lead to damage of tissues. And so you're trying to, with inflammation, when it's used in like a negative way, it means that it's at a level that is leading to tissue damage. Usually there's some exceptions, but it's you can think of it as immune system activation that is then not supporting health. It's causing damage at that point, and that can damage any organ. It can, when you're talking about certain foods, for some people, certain foods are inflammatory, meaning when they eat them, it activates their immune system in a way that is not helpful. It's not healing. It's actually harming maybe your digestive system, or, it could be harming maybe your brain, or, there's a lot of different ways that can play out. But it's inflammation, like cholesterol. Cholesterol is also something that people are scared of. Cholesterol is also critical. It's a critical part and component it's a building block in your body. It's also how you make hormones. So it's how you repair cells and create every cell in your body, as well as it's a backbone to create different cells. It's how you create hormones. So having a healthy level of cholesterol is also extremely important. And it's never talked about. It's only talked about when it's kind of at the level that is considered too high. And so it kind of has a bad rap, and inflammation is the same thing. You definitely need an inflammatory response. If you're exposed to a bacteria or a virus, or when you get sick, you need an inflammatory response to heal the body. So it's not all bad, but that's, it mostly gets talked about in terms of inflammation being too high.
So if you think about, I'm asking you something that is probably impossible, but you think about entrepreneurs. Everyone listening to this or most people are entrepreneurs. A large percentage of them have, 7 and 8 figure businesses or have been established a little bit. But even if you're early stages, entrepreneurs are notorious for working too hard, getting hyper focused on things, which is required to get a business going. But it's really easy to neglect health, to not sleep enough, for diet to suffer. Just across the board, it's easy to have a lot of health things slide. Are there certain things that you see that entrepreneurs are especially bad at, like either in terms of their behaviors, like I mentioned, but how those manifest into some of these biomarkers and some of these conditions? Like, what are, for all the people listening right now that are entrepreneurs, what are the couple, 2 or 3 things they need to be most on alert about that's probably wrecking their either mental health, their ability to make great decisions and function intellectually, or their physical health?
I would say, without a doubt, the number one thing that I see being an issue is sleep. A lot of people sacrifice their sleep because they're busy and they're trying to build a business. And when you're in the grind of that, it's really hard, I think, to calm your body and your brain down enough to get really good, deep quality sleep, but also just not sleeping enough hours. I mean, I see so many people that are very busy, and I get it. Like, there are going to be times in your life, maybe, especially when you're starting a business, especially, where you're maybe not prioritizing your health like you should. And that should be a short period of time. And then you should move on from that, because that's something that, after getting into the habit of doing that year after year after year and never actually fixing that issue, it catches up with you for sure. And lack of sleep is one of the biggest, from a longevity standpoint, it's one of the biggest issues. And it will show up in your blood work in a million ways. When you don't sleep enough, and by not sleeping enough, I mean like less than 7.5 hours a night on average. Some people need a little bit more, a little bit less, but research really shows like 7.5 hours or more, between 7.5 and 9 that's really like the sweet spot. And obviously, occasionally that doesn't happen, but on average, that's what you want to be allowing yourself for, and to make sure that you're getting good quality sleep when you're sleeping. So you're not waking up all night. You're getting enough REM and deep sleep, and have ways of tracking those things. So sleep is like the number one thing with all entrepreneurs. It's one of the first things that I ask about in detail, because it's going to significantly impact your chronic disease risk and how your blood sugar balances and your cholesterol and your ApoB level, your inflammation. When you don't sleep enough, inflammation can be unchecked, and it's not, it leads to higher inflammatory responses from things that if you were sleeping properly, maybe wouldn't. It really significantly impacts your ability to balance your response to stress and your cravings for sugar, and build your ability to build muscle mass, which is also a critical component to aging and longevity. So, it affects pretty much everything, and it's the biggest thing. There's nothing else that comes close.
So when you say 7.5 hours, I'm usually pretty good at getting being in bed for 7.5 hours, right? But then I'll wake up in the morning and my little sleep tracker, I'll look at it and I'll be like, 6 hours. I was like, I was no, come on. And it'll always shortchange me between an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. So when you say, and I think, when you say 9 hours, and that's just, seems like such a long time to fit into life.
Don't need quite that much. Yeah. I would say 7.5 is like the average. 7.5 to 8 is like a good sweet spot. Some people need a little bit more, especially if they're healing from something. If you're going through something if you experienced a trauma, if you have an illness, if you have, so there's things that would increase your need a little bit, even beyond 9 hours for some. But for the average person, let's say 7.5, 7.5 to 8. So you're not getting under 7.5. And with the sleep trackers, the thing you have to keep in mind is they're not perfect. They're an amazing tool. I'm addicted to my Oura Ring, and it's the one fitness tracker that I've had. And I would say above all other gadgets and tools that I have, and I have them all, it's the one that has stayed consistent. However, for some people, what I notice is when they're in the lightest phase of sleep, which you cycle in and out of during the night, some people, whether it's the fit of their ring, or I'm not exactly sure why, that light phase of sleep it counts as them being awake, even though they're not really awake. And so it might be undercounting your sleep a little bit, but you also want to make sure that you're in bed long enough to allow your body to get that much sleep, because some people will get in bed and they're like, okay, I'll get up in 7.5 hours. And then it takes a half an hour to fall asleep, or you're doing something, you're reading or whatever. And so you're not giving yourself a proper amount of time. So you might have to increase, the amount of time in bed by 30 minutes and see if that improves anything.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I was afraid you were going to say.
You'll be more productive during the day.
I know.
Your brain will be more on it. It's one of those things that if I can convince people, you will be a lot more productive, and your brain will be more on it if you're getting enough sleep. So in the long run, it's worth the lost time.
It is. It's just, man, it's so sometimes so hard to part. And one of the things I'm realizing too, is you gave me this whole comprehensive plan for really optimizing, dialing things in. And I'm sure there's a lot of doctors out there who are going to feel very seen when I say this, but it is, I feel like getting a health plan is kind of the equivalent of opening up an LLC as an entrepreneur. It's an action that you take that makes you feel good. But, I was revisiting it for our conversation today, and I was like, oh, I'm doing really well in these areas. Ooh, I haven't even started in these areas. And anyway, so just point being it's fun and it's great and exciting to do all this stuff, but the real benefits come through the follow through, which is, of course, it's common sense, but so often so many of us don't do it, myself, somewhat included. Which maybe leads into some of the things I teased at the time. I want to talk about a couple of the things that came out of my results that were very counterintuitive, and less so because people are fascinated into, my biological makeup, but more so for just an illustration of how a personalized in-depth blood panel can kind of tell you things about your body that you wouldn't suspect. So the first one was like, you told me to salt my food more, which I think like if you go to most doctors and said, hey, that would be something that it seems very counterintuitive, given there's a lot of, salt is often looked at as a bad thing. So why, what was the blood marker that came up why did you tell me to do that based on the results that we had?
Yeah. So salt, there's a lot of them, but salt and fat, those are two very villainized things in our diet. And there are reasons why they were villainized in the first place. And a lot of it was through poorly conducted research that was also interpreted poorly. So with salt, there are some people, a pretty small percentage of people really, who are salt sensitive, and it increases their blood pressure permanently. And so it can lead to hypertension. So there are some people who react to salt poorly. So that's not to downplay that. But for the average person who eats a really healthy diet, so if you are eating a lot of processed food, salt and sugar or and fat are things that make foods more addictive, and it makes you want to eat more of them. And processed food industry, or just the food industry in general, when you're making processed foods, those are the components that are put into foods to make them make you want more. So this is to say somebody who's cooking a lot of their food, eating a lot of whole foods, not eating a lot of processed food. Those are situations where you need to make sure that you're salting your food enough. And everyone needs kind of a different amount of salt. And you can tell based on, so in this test that we did, I tested your electrolyte levels and looked at your salt levels. We're looking at one snapshot in time, what your sodium was at that one moment in time. And your body really likes to maintain a pretty tight balance of electrolytes. So your sodium, your body's really working hard to keep things within a tight balance, because your body doesn't want your electrolytes to drop. That's not good for your heart, for muscle, for everything. So when I'm looking at salt levels, I'm looking to see if they're on the lower end of what the optimal ranges are that I'm looking at. And if they're on the lower end and you eat pretty healthy and you work out and you live, especially if you live in a hot place where you're sweating a lot, where you're working out and sweating a lot, if you use saunas, if you've been sick, your needs for salt increases quite a bit. There's a lot of different reasons that your salt needs would increase. If you drink a lot of water, you need more salt. So I'm looking at your salt level, and then kind of your current lifestyle and diet habits, and also is symptoms. So if your energy levels are low, if you get headaches, especially when you wake up in the morning, if you have brain fog issues, there's different symptoms as well that would indicate that you need more salt. All of those things kind of go into that decision if you need to salt your food more. And there's quite a lot of people, actually. You would be surprised at how many people need more salt and just don't know it. And that is responsible for their afternoon brain fog, or kind of a mild headache that they get when they wake up in the morning, or, other various symptoms with energy, really.
Interesting. And does that just show up and manifest in a low sodium level in the blood markers, or what's the marker that actually shows up?
Yeah. Sodium, your sodium levels, that would be one way that's kind of helping us to determine if that's something that would be helpful for you, for sure. Especially if we have historical data that shows many sodium levels that are always on the low end of the normal reference range, or lower than the optimal reference range. If you see that, a history of that, then that would really give us a really strong indicator that you need more salt. Having one test is a little tricky, because sometimes your salt can be a little bit low one time in that one snapshot. And then you have to go more based on symptoms and health goals.
Another one that surprised me was, I live in Arizona, moved down here chasing the sun because I'm a huge sun addict and don't do as well when the sun is not shining. And so, it's I'm looking outside, it's gorgeous. This is a pretty typical day. And we came back and you're like, yeah, you don't have enough vitamin D, right? And I'm outside. I thought I was outside a decent amount, and it just shocked me. I would have bet heavily that I had enough. And that just was something else that popped up. And is that another just biomarker why is that? And then Why do you think that
Mm-hmm.
is, given where I live? And then also, how did you detect that in the blood panel? Is it just a vitamin D?
It is a vitamin D test.
It
Yep. You
is.
can
Okay.
test your vitamin D level. It's funny because a lot of people that live in sunny locations end up having lower vitamin D levels, and it could be from just more sunscreen use in those areas. When you are wearing sunscreen, which sunscreen is a good thing, it's not a bad thing, but when you're wearing a lot of sunscreen, especially if you put it on first thing in the morning and you never leave the house without sunscreen on, then that's blocking some of the sun rays that then go on to convert vitamin D in the level of your skin. So it could be a sunscreen related thing where you need to have a little bit of skin exposure to sunlight and being outdoors without sunscreen first thing in the morning. It could also be related to some genetic issues with how much sun exposure you need in order to keep your levels adequate. I think that is probably an area that is, in your case, if you're getting lots of good sun exposure, it could be related to some genetic issues with just converting to the active form of vitamin D that we're looking at in the blood test. So I think usually it's one of those two reasons, or the person's just not getting enough sun, which is also a big thing, which I know that you are. So it's probably somewhat of a genetic issue. And so you take a supplement that has some vitamin D, observe how that changes your blood vitamin D level. And then with all blood tests, the more that so when we go through blood tests, I put everything into a spreadsheet so that any future tests, you can see how things are trending over time. And there's some individual differences from person to person for sure. There's not these really rigid reference ranges that everybody is, completely within all the time. I mean, there is some individual differences from person to person in certain areas. And so we're looking for your vitamin D level. We're looking to see it improve over time, especially if you're taking a supplement, and you're getting enough sunshine, but it might be a little bit lower than the next person. And that's a perfectly normal range for you. So you have to kind of have some historical data to go on.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on supplements? Like after we got done with all of the blood work, you gave me a handful of supplements to take, every morning and night. What are your thoughts on just general supplements? Like, do you prescribe just general supplements to people across the board, or do you think it's much more? If you're going to do it, you really need to do it on more of a a sniper rifle style approach for what you really need in your body. There's a bunch of, I know you have some interesting thoughts on like kind of supplements for general well-being and longevity. That's a little bit counter to kind of what other people think. Talk about supplements a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, supplements are one of my main tools that I use to help people to improve their current level of health. So I am very pro supplement. I think that they're oftentimes, or they can be overused or used incorrectly. There's so many possible supplements out there, and you can get into, if you're really into supplements, the trap you can get into is just taking so much that you have no idea what's doing what anymore, or how to track if you still need it, or how to track if it's doing anything for you. So I try to be somewhat of a minimalist. There's always times when more supplements are required for somebody who is trying to achieve a certain health goal. But in general, I like to be a minimalist with supplements. I like to track markers in the blood to know if you still need it or not, when that is possible. I like to change things up often and not be on the same things year after year after year, especially the same brands. And I like to have a purpose for why I'm taking something. I want to know that it's actually doing something. And once it's done that job, then I move on from that. There's a few exceptions of things that might be something you'd want to take longer term based on your susceptibilities health-wise, or a disease process that you have, or some genetic makeup that you have. Like there are reasons to take things longer term, but I'm not someone who likes to just keep adding things on and to never change. I like to know exactly why I'm taking something and how to track it and kind of go from there. So I have some longevity supplements that I like, that in general, healthy people do really well with. But I don't really say everyone should be on the same stuff either.
What are your favorite longevity supplements, and what do they do to promote kind of, is it just general longevity and lifespan, or is it more nuanced than
that? So there's some like longevity supplements are like a big buzzword right now because there's a lot of great aging research that's going on right now. And I haven't jumped on the bandwagon of like NMN and doing some of the specific longevity formulas yet. I really like doing the basics first. And to me, I think, especially as a longevity supplement, creatine is a really great it's been studied for 50 years. It's extremely safe. It helps us to build muscle mass, which is one of the most critical things as you're aging, and maintain your brain health, also very critical to aging. So it helps with recovery and memory, and it can offset sleep deprivation, which happens occasionally. It can help with cellular hydration to make you more hydrated. So I think creatine is great, and it doesn't have to be a huge dose. You don't have to do the loading stuff. It's just like 5 grams a day. For the general healthy person, that's a great recommendation. Magnesium, I think magnesium is used in like over 600 enzymatic reactions in your body. So it's a critical mineral. I love magnesium. There's a lot of indicators that you might need more magnesium than less, but in general, most people do well on more magnesium. It helps with calming your nervous system. It helps get into a deeper phase of sleep. It helps with managing the effects from stress. It can get rid of muscle aches and pains and headaches. And I mean, there's a million reasons to take it, but that magnesium tends to be, from a mineral standpoint, one that I really recommend. And, the soil that our food is grown in is not always the most nutrient rich. And so oftentimes we can have these mineral deficiencies that build over time. And then my third one that I really love for most people is collagen. Collagen decreases as you age. And so it's one of those kind of main nutrients that you do get in your diet. Hopefully, if in some form, if you're eating any animal-based meat, you're getting some collagen in that for sure. But it's the most abundant protein in the body, and it decreases as you age. And so it's really important for your hair, skin, and your nails, and your digestive system, and your joints, your connective tissues, all things, your eyes, all critical for aging. So I also use collagen kind of like I would a food, and I add collagen into my diet because I'm not doing a lot of bone broths and things like that.
Okay, fascinating. What about full body scans? This is something I'll probably do another episode on this at some point, but this summer went in and very much in the vein of what you're trying to do is preventative. There's full body scans that have become somewhat more popular over the last, 3-4 years. You go in, I think it's an MRI. You go in and they do it, sit in this tube for an hour and get every part of you scanned, and they give you this full report. And I had a really interesting experience that didn't give me anything earth shattering, but gave me, kind of some peace of mind and a few things to think about. But then you also hear the critique from people saying like, hey, they're not that effective. A lot of times they can create these false positives that just send you down these rabbit trails, and you waste time and money on things that aren't a big deal. Anyway, what are your thoughts on those? Because that's something that I think people are thinking more about. And if, you can spend, they cost, about $2,000 to $2,500, depending on where you go. It seems expensive, but even if you do that for 10 years and you catch cancer, a couple of years early, it pays for itself right there, if not in your life. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I am a huge fan. There's a lot of cancer in my family, including pancreatic cancer, which is one of the scariest cancers that we have still because we don't have great ways to catch it early. And in the earliest stage, there are things that you can do effectively to treat pancreatic cancer. But when it's caught at the very end, because there's not a lot of symptoms until the very end stage, there's not a lot that you can do. So it's one of those diagnoses that is pretty dire. And if, in my opinion, when you lose somebody really close to you to a cancer like that, and you see how that process goes, if this advanced MRI screening helps to reduce the amount of pancreatic cancer diagnosed at late stage, that's enough for me to say that I'm on board. I don't think any of these tools are perfect yet. They're definitely getting better very rapidly. And with AI, they're going to be just on fire eventually. A lot of, I think, our cancer screenings are going to be with AI. There's going to be some major jumps that happen. Pretty soon, I'm hoping, but basically it's an advanced MRI screening. So if you go into a general MRI, just get a basic MRI, and you do the full body with your with the just general MRI, you're going to get tons of things that show up that are artifacts, things that don't mean anything, that will send you down the rabbit holes. The Prenuvo and the scans that are doing this advanced MRI, they're trying to get rid of some of that noise. So it is a better MRI than for this type of purpose than the MRIs that we're using in hospitals right now. So it is a different tool in that it's more, it's getting rid of a lot of the noise and hopefully a lot of the false positive diagnoses. But I do think, I'm certainly going to be doing it. I just did my first one over the holidays, and I am a big fan. I think that, the technology certainly will get better over time, but I'm here for it. I think it's going to help us to catch things that have been traditionally really, really hard to catch. So I'm going to probably do it every couple of years and have that be something that I'm doing actively to give myself peace of mind that I'm keeping an eye on any potential cancer. And if something comes up as, basically, if you get something that needs to be looked into further, it doesn't necessarily, it just means that you need to get further testing in that area to see if there's any problem. So it doesn't necessarily mean that 100% there's an issue, but I'd rather know, the things to kind of follow up on, even if it creates extra doctor visits, than have a diagnosis that, you catch too late.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like too, the value of getting them would increase exponentially the older you got, where you're probably, I'm guessing, statistically more likely to start encountering cancer, right? So if you're in your 20s, probably less likely, but if you're like 60s, 70s, even late 50s, or it just seems like the value goes up so much the older you get.
Absolutely. And I think that would change kind of the frequency that I would recommend doing it. Like the younger you are, the less frequent you probably need to do it, especially if you're starting in your 20s, like once every 5 years, 3 to 5 years could be, especially, because they're expensive right now and it's not covered by insurance. Hopefully that will be a big thing that's changing in the near future. But depending on how old you are is kind of, I would use that as my marker of how often I need to do it, really.
That's fantastic. Thank you for going through all this. Thank you for all the work you did on my blood workup and the plan. It's been fascinating and really cool working with you. How can people, if they're listening, if they want to do something similar, get a full blood work and recommendation to go through a similar process, how can they find you? What does that process look like? Can you give them maybe a rough idea on pricing? Give them the details if they're interested.
Sure. My website's dralexisshields.com. And on the website, you'll see an application that you fill out. It's just a short kind of, goes through some questions of what your health goals are, what kind of testing you've had done, if you've had any done, and just some just basic general questions that we go through in the beginning to figure out if you're a good fit. And then I send, for all my US-based clients, any way I can order blood work through Quest, a nationwide lab, and I get pretty great discounts too through a wholesaler that goes through Quest. So I order discounted blood work. The blood work is around $370. If you want to add on hormones or anything else, it's a little extra. The consult itself is for, I think, around $500. And then basically the process is application. I reach out to you, we get your blood work ordered, you get the blood work going. figure out we schedule you, and then you go through an extensive head to toe assessment before we talk. I go through all that information, have all your blood work analyzed before we talk, and then we do an hour-long review of health goals and things that you want to accomplish, what that means with all of your health biomarkers and data. I give you all that information, and then we create like a plan going forward of how to improve those and what I see the biggest kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of things that you can do to improve your overall health, the things that you might want to track in the future, and then send all of that off to you.
Yeah, it's super cool. Again, Dr. Alexis Shields, SHIELDS.com, or just Google her name. Was super helpful for me. I have members of my family doing it in the future and would recommend it strongly. So thank you so much. Appreciate you coming on to talk through all this and geek out, and for the help
You're
personally.
welcome.
And looking forward to, continuing to keep things tracking, and hopefully you can keep me on the straight and narrow here going forward. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Anytime.